invaded the Quad Cities last week. Not the Robert E. Lee, of course, but actor Tom Dugan, portraying him in his one-man play, Shades of Grey. Dugan was in the Quad Cities as a Quad City Arts visiting artist, performing at schools, the Capitol Theater, and at the very intimate setting of the Dear Wyman House.
I researched for a year before I put one word down.
Tom Dugan's appearance January 19th at the Dear Wyman House held special significance as it was the 200th anniversary of the birth of Robert E. Lee. He told the audience a little bit about himself, explained how he developed the play, and plugged his then upcoming performance at the Capitol Theater.
I pretty much go through the whole war all by myself. And I tell you, every time I go out on stage, I say, I'm going to win this time. Not yet. But next Saturday, I'm still hopeful.
Dugan, whose credits include roles in Ghostbusters 2, Kindergarten Cop, and touring with Jack Klugman in On Golden Pond, was looking to write and perform a one-man play. He hit upon the idea of the Civil War and was surprised to find no one had done such a production about Lee. But he wasn't exactly a Civil War buff.
I researched the play for an entire year before I wrote anything. And then I wrote and then rewrote, because the job of a writer is, the biggest job is the rewriting. And so I wrote and rewrote for another 2 years. And the premiere was around 3 years to the day that I began the research. The costume had to be exactly right. Everything has to be historically correct. It's a responsibility, I think, that anyone who takes on history in a theatrical way, I think there's a responsibility to tell it accurately. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're just doing it for yourself, you know? So I'm very proud that all the historians at the Appomattox Courthouse Museum and the Museum of the Confederacy and the Virginia Historical Society have all given me the thumbs up on the historic accuracy of the show.
He also thought of his father, a World War II vet, for inspiration.
What I did know about was the concept of the humble hero. And as I said in my lecture just now, that I was very interested in my father's experience in World War II. And so the concept of a humble hero was something I knew. And then I applied that to the history of the Civil War, and that's what brought me to that story, and that's how I became very, very interested in the subject.
He looked beyond historical facts to find Lee the human being.
In stories like that Lee had a sense of humor, I allowed myself to take the liberty to see him as a man who wasn't ramrod straight at all times and didn't always say the most proper thing, a man who was confused a little bit. I went back to the books and I deduced that, oh, he said one thing here, but then 3 days later he said something else. And what happened in those 3 days? And then I read more, like through his daughter's diaries, and they said he paced the floor all night, he asked us questions, he was sitting talking to himself by the fireplace, and there's a human being.
Robert E. Lee was the son of Light Horse Harry Lee, a Revolutionary War hero, skilled horseman, hence his nickname, and eventual governor of Virginia. Robert E. Lee graduated second in his class from West Point, and after 32 years of military service and on the eve of the Civil War, was offered the command of the Union Army by President Lincoln. But back then, when one entered the military, they took an oath of allegiance to their home state. Lee felt it was his duty to stand by Virginia.
He believed in nonviolent change. He had seen war in Mexico and was appalled by it. Appalled. And he knew what it was. He knew what it would take to have a civil war. He said it will be a bloodbath, and he knew it will take 4 years. He wanted to see this, the abolition happen state by state. He also, with the South, believed in states' rights, that it was the states' responsibility to govern themselves. And Virginia actually, prior to the Civil War, was in the process of freeing the slaves. They put it up to vote, and it lost by just a few votes, and everyone expected that the next vote that was taken, that it would be passed.
Tom Dugan as Robert E. Lee.
There are few, I believe, in this enlightened age who will not acknowledge that slavery is a moral and a political evil. However, there are those who believe it is a necessary evil. Perhaps this whole war is God's punishment for that national sin. As yet, no plan has been created for these 4 million new Americans once being given their freedom. It must be considered that for the past 250 years, this peculiar institution has been woven into the very fabric of our culture. After dropping off the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, the Mayflower's next voyage was to retrieve slaves from Africa for America. Since the beginning of this century, the U.S. Constitution has stipulated that a Negro may be counted as 3/5 human. Now please tell me how quickly you believe the average American will change his views and see these and embrace these former slaves as equals. At the beginning of this war, I proposed to President Davis a type of proclamation of gradual emancipation. I believe, as did Abraham Lincoln in 1861, that a gradual emancipation would have sooner rectified slavery's evils than did the storms and tempests of this fiery controversy. I think that my attitude when I first began the research is probably quite similar to what the audiences experience when they come to see the show. I thought, well, okay, he was a traitor and he was, a bigot. And then I just cracked open the very first book, I did my work, read a few pages and found out the opposite. And I thought, well, if I'm so surprised by this story, maybe the audience will be too. I think it's my job as a playwright to challenge the audience, always. Challenge them against what they think they know, and that is what engages an audience. The worst thing you can think of as a performer is an audience that kind of leans back and just like that. But what I see when I do the play, and I have an opportunity to see that because I am talking to the audience a lot, is them leaning in. And that's what I like, because their curiosity is piqued.
The play's title, Robert E. Lee, Shades of Gray, has a double meaning.
Of course, the uniform that the Confederates wore was gray. But I think that history, and the Civil War in particular, has become a black and white issue. Another double entendre. The slaves, the white plantation owners. But it is not a black and white issue. Nothing is. Everything is shades of gray. Everything. What can you think of that's not a shade of gray? There are complexities to everything. And what I wanted to do in an entertaining way was to show the gray areas of history, the gray areas of the Civil War.
Lee's command of the Confederate forces ended at Appomattox, Virginia in April of 1865. There is nothing more for me to do, he said, but to go see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths. But with the war over, Lee told his fellow Virginians, abandon your animosities and make your sons Americans. Dugan hopes audience members go away with this.
The first thing I want them to say was, that was exciting. What a good story. And then after that say, geez, I didn't know that historically. I didn't know he said that or did that or felt that way. I didn't know that happened. Or I knew that happened, but I didn't know it happened that way. Or, I knew all that stuff happened, but I never felt anything about it. But through this play, I was able to actually feel emotion about these battles or these decisions, this terrible tragedy.
Up this week's edition of Life and Times from all of us here at WQPT. Thanks for watching, and good night.